I wish I had alcohol with me. I really wish I did because, man, this movie is something else. But we're going to talk about it. Hey guys, what's going on? It's Daniel Strunk from QuickTime Reactions, and welcome back to my Forever Classic series where we are talking all things Fantastic Four and Fantastic Four related things before our first family takes its first steps in the MCU. And we're here, folks. We are here. What is probably the bottom of the pit, bottom of the barrel in terms of, Fantastic Four related things that we are going to be talking about in this series? I am, of course, talking about Fant4stic, which came out 10 years ago in 2015. In August, it will be 10 years old, which is absolutely insane. This film was directed by Josh Trank, and it stars, as our first family, milesteller, katemara, jamiebell, and michaelbjordan, along with Toby Kebbell, Reg E. Cathy, timblakenelson, as well as a whole host of other people. And it, of course, tells the story of the Fantastic Four. Well, it starts out with Ben and Reed as kids in elementary school, and Reed wants to be the first person to travel to different planets via teleportation. And so he's building a teleporter that allows him to go to different planets. But when Sue and her father, or I guess person that runs the Baxter Foundation, Reggie Carthay's character, decide to take them into the Baxter Foundation to basically make this a reality. These idiots, along with Victor Von Doom, played by Toby Kebbell, decide, they're going to do it on their own. They're not going to have astronauts go out and do this. So they head to Planet Zero and essentially go out and, gain the powers that they are going to gain, as Marvel's first family. And then, of course, they have to stop Victor Von Doom from going back to Planet Zero and basically destroying Earth as they know it. So, if I don't sound as enthusiastic as, I have been in my other reviews, it is because this movie it's really bad. It's bad. I wouldn't necessarily say it's bad. It's competently made, and I think would be okay if it weren't called Fantastic Four. So let's just dive into this. Josh Trank, you might know him more famously for him making Chronicle, which was a found footage movie that had basically teens that were played, I think, by Dame DeHaan and also Michael B. Jordan, gain superpowers and basically kind of, record that with their own equipment. And I think the budget for that movie was, maybe $15 million, and it made, over $100 million at the box office. So Fox, seeing that, brought him in to basically make this Fantastic Four film, because if they didn't make a Fantastic Four film, because the last one that came out was Silver Surfer in 2007, this came out in 2015. if they didn't make a new Fantastic Four film in a certain period of time, the rights would, of course, go back to Marvel, which is now owned by Disney. So basically, they had to make this movie in order to keep the rights to that IP. So, that turned out well, didn't it? But, Trank, I think also, yeah, I hate to, punch a guy, while he's down. And I'm assuming that he is a nice guy, but Trank, I think, wanted to take a more dark and gritty approach to the Fantastic Four, basically kind of make it into, a horror film, because, once we see, them come back from Planet Zero, we see Reed and his limbs like all stretched out weird. We see Ben like emerge from the rocks, and he's like, Reed, help me, and it's like, dark and scary. That isn't what that's not what the Fantastic Four is supposed to be. Like, I've seen people, give First Steps, all sorts of, gripe in the lead up to its release. But you cannot say that they are not matching the tone from the comics. Them being, bright and, colorful, and, them being a family. That I think is an aspect that I think is lost in this film. Although I think the one scene where I think those horror elements do work is where Doom emerges, and he's killing people left, right, and center with his powers. That I think it warrants the horror kind of vibes that are going on. That I think is also very much warranted. And I can't believe I forgot to mention this in my other two Fantastic Four movie reviews, but I just find it absolutely hysterical that Chris Evans and Michael B. Jordan, two guys that have played Human Torch, went on to have much better roles in the MCU. I just find that absolutely hysterical. I think the performances out of everybody in the core cast, I think, are solid. Of course, dealing with because if I remember correctly, Trank had some like maybe erratic behaviors on set on this film. So I think dealing with those types of circumstances, I think the performances from everybody I think were solid from what I could gather. This movie was also the first time that a full VFX thing was used. I know for First Steps they basically used I think a practical suit to kind of get lighting right, I think. But this one was fully CG, and the studio that made it, Otoy, I think did a really amazing job at getting the texturing correct on the thing, like making them look like made out of rock, essentially. I think that looked really, really good. But the main issue with this film is just kind of like, checking off things for what makes a Fantastic Four film. Like, for instance, Thing's catchphrase, it's clobbering time. Where did we first hear that? Well, it was Ben's older brother saying it to him right before he abuses him, which, great. Johnny says flame on, as kind of like a punctuation line to an argument that he has with Sue. These things are treated like check marks on a list, whereas in the Tim Story films, they're embraced with like fun and colorfulness, like they have excitement to them. But here it's more gloom and dread, and that gets into the bigger issue with this film is that it's too different from what the Fantastic Four is in the comics. Again, say what you want about First Steps, but at least it fits more of the vibe of the comics than this one. I mean, in one issue of The Punisher, I think the artist drew the Fantastic Four to look like the cast of this movie, and they get killed in a bomb explosion in a building. That's how much people hated this movie. And much in the same way when I talked about Mission Impossible 2, if it were literally called anything else other than Mission Impossible, I think Mission Impossible 2 would have been a solid little film. Same thing here. If it were called anything else other than Fantastic Four, I think people would say, it's got its problems, but I had a fun time watching it. Like a nice horror twist on much darker twist than what the superhero fare we were getting from the MCU at that point. I know the MCU was kind of in a bit of a dark period as well, but this is like just a tad darker than what was going on in the MCU. So I think people would say, what a really cool dark twist on the superhero genre. But it had the name Fantastic Four attached to it, and then people were mad. And also, I don't want to type anything onto my keyboard because I have some of the key changes, like scene changes on my keyboard. So I don't know if I can type anything without changing the scene. But Josh Trank, I think, put out a tweet a day before the film actually released and was like, a year ago I had something that was really, really cool and would be really, really interesting, but it got messed around with. But that's studio, that's Hollywood, I guess, and that caused a bit of concern about this movie. And this movie did not do well. It made $56 million here in the States, and I think, if I remember correctly, made $180 million worldwide on its release, but that was against a $120 million budget, so it was not good. And I think this movie played across 4,000 screens, which that makes it even more bad. And this kind of was the catalyst for Disney to come in and buy up Fox, and now we have the Fantastic Four in the MCU right now. But yeah, this movie it's just not good. It just goes against every single thing that the Fantastic Four is in the comics. Like, Reed is, a scientist that looks to the stars. And this Reed is a guy that looks into, computer and codes, which speaking from experience, I have my degree in computer engineering. We computer engineers are, not the most personable people. We just like to be in our own bubble and just like work on stuff. That's pretty much what we do. So, it's not what the Fantastic Four is in the comics. And again, say what you will about, Fantastic Four First Steps, and I've heard a lot of people talk a lot about, Fantastic Four First Steps and whether it will be good or bad. But at least it looks more like the Fantastic Four in the comics than this film. And that, I think, is a positive. But yeah, that is pretty much my review of Fant4stic. Yeah, this is not good. But luckily, we will start to climb out of this hole, starting with some fun camp. And we will be looking at next week the unreleased Fantastic Four film made by Roger Corman back, I think, in the 80s. So at least we're going to have some fun in these last couple of weeks looking at that, as well as the Incredibles films, to kind of end off on a high note. But until then, guys, be safe out there. And word of advice, don't watch Fant4stic. Just don't. I will see you guys next time.